So today we're going to take a deep dive into some pretty turbulent political waters.
Yeah.
We're looking at Donald Trump's rally at Madison Square Garden in New York City.
Wow.
Bold move, holding a rally in a city that's not exactly been a fan favorite of his in the past.
Yeah.
To help us break it all down, we've got a super in-depth fact check from Al Jazeera and a piece from Fox News that really focuses on J.D. Vance's response to CNN's Jake Tapper.
Oh, wow.
Should be interesting.
Yeah. I'm fascinated by this choice of venue.
Yeah.
You know, right in the heart of NYC.
Yeah.
A city that's historically been pretty Democrat.
Yeah.
And, you know, let's not forget, recently handed down a felony conviction against Trump.
Oh, yeah.
It feels like a deliberate poke, don't you think?
Oh, yeah.
Like, hey, I'm here.
Yeah, it's like, look at me front and center.
Yeah.
Speaking of front and center, the speaker list for this event was, well,
interesting to say the least.
unexpected, right? I mean, family members, sure, but then you've got politicians like J.D. Vance, and then they throw in Elon Musk and Hulk Hogan.
Yeah.
It's like a real mixed bag.
It's like the most diverse guest list
yeah,
possible.
really running the
It
gamut.
really does highlight the
Yeah.
wide range of folks that make up his base.
Yeah.
But also maybe an attempt to broaden the appeal, you know? But you can't ignore the fact that this whole event was kind of overshadowed by comedian Tony Hinchcliffe's jokes.
Yeah.
I mean,
They were rough.
Al Jazeera didn't hold back, calling them out as seriously offensive,
Yeah.
targeting all sorts of different groups.
Yeah. And both sides came down on those comments.
Yeah,
Even the Trump campaign had to kind of distance themselves
had to.
a little bit.
Makes you wonder about the vetting process there.
Yeah.
What kind of message does that send?
Yeah.
Let's shift gears a little bit
Okay.
and look at some of the claims that Trump made himself, especially when it comes to immigration.
Yeah.
A topic he kept circling back to throughout the rally.
Hmm.
He really hammered on his past border security record, saying it was the tightest in U.S. history.
Okay.
But when Al Jazeera looked into that, that's not quite true.
Really?
There's more to the story.
Hmm.
And then there was this whole thing about FEMA and hurricane relief efforts.
Okay.
He kind of suggested that FEMA couldn't help people after the hurricane because the government had blown all its cash on illegal immigration.
Really?
But again, Al Jazeera debunked that pretty thoroughly,
Hmm.
pointing out that FEMA did provide relief,
Right.
and the budgets for immigration and disaster relief, they're totally separate.
Oh, okay.
No connection there.
Hmm.
It feels like he's trying to find a scapegoat,
Right.
play on people's fears,
Yeah.
which, let's be honest, is a pretty common tactic.
Hmm.
But then things get really intense when he starts talking about Kamala Harris.
Okay.
He went as far as to say she's bringing criminals from foreign prisons and mental institutions.
Oh.
He even specifically mentioned Venezuela and the Congo.
Wait, so countries are just like sending their criminals over here?
Right.
That sounds kind of crazy.
It does sound pretty wild.
What did Al Jazeera find out about that?
So they dug into it,
Okay.
and they found absolutely no evidence of countries just emptying their prisons
Okay.
and sending people to the U.S. illegally.
Okay.
They did find data showing that about 108,000 non-citizens with criminal records were arrested in the U.S. between 2021 and 2024.
Okay.
But that includes people who were stopped at ports of entry.
Oh, okay.
So not everyone was even let into the country.
So not as simple as he makes it sound.
Not at all.
More about painting a scary picture than sticking to the facts.
Exactly.
Okay, and then there's this really alarming number he throws out.
Yeah.
325,000 missing migrant children.
Wow.
He even suggests that they're either dead or being trafficked for sex or forced into slavery.
Oh, that's heavy.
Where on earth did he get that number?
That's where things get interesting.
Okay.
Al Jazeera traced that figure back to a federal report that was actually about unaccompanied minors. Now, the report does mention that over 291,000 of these kids hadn't been served a notice to appear by IC.
Okay, so what does a notice to appear actually mean in this context?
So basically, it's a legal document that tells an immigrant when and where to show up in court for their immigration hearing.
Okay.
It's a key step. But because immigration courts are so backlogged,
Yeah.
it can take a long time for these notices to be issued.
So it's not that these kids are literally missing. They're just stuck in this legal limbo.
Exactly.
Okay.
The report does acknowledge that these kids are more vulnerable to trafficking
Right.
because of their situation,
Right.
but it never actually states that they are missing. Trump basically twisted the information to create a more dramatic, fear-inducing narrative.
A classic example of using a grain of truth to spin a whole story.
Yeah.
Then we get the claim that Kamala Harris promised to abolish IC.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Did Al Jazeera clear that up?
They did. Back in 2018, she did suggest reassessing IC's role. But she later acknowledged its function and has always maintained that she would follow the law.
So again, a soundbite taken out of context to make it sound more extreme than it actually is.
It happens all the time.
It does.
It really highlights how important it is to look at the full picture.
Yeah.
Not just the snippets that are designed to grab headlines.
It's all about the nuances.
Right.
Which brings us to another area that Trump really focused on, the economy.
Of course.
He claimed that Harris's tie-breaking vote on the American Rescue Plan was solely responsible for the worst inflation in the history of our country.
Wow.
He even threw out this figure of $28,000. Suggesting that's how much extra each household has had to spend since Biden became president.
Linking those two together is a clever tactic.
Yeah.
Painting Harris as the villain.
So is there any truth to the idea that her vote caused, like, runaway inflation?
Not really.
Okay.
Al Jazeera found that while the American Rescue Plan might have nudged inflation up a bit, it was definitely not the main driver. Global issues like the pandemic-related supply chain disruptions and the war in Ukraine had a much bigger impact on inflation.
Okay, so it's way more complicated than he's making it sound.
Way more.
And what about that $28,000 figure?
That's misleading, too.
Okay.
It doesn't factor in things like wage increases that have actually helped offset some of those increased costs.
Right.
Depending on the time frame you're looking at.
Okay.
It's another example of just simplifying a complex issue for political points.
Seems like cherry-picking data is a recurring theme here.
Definitely is.
But let's move on to another hot-button topic. LGBTQ plus issues.
Okay.
Trump claimed that Harris was pushing for free sex change operations for illegal immigrants, all on the taxpayer's dime.
Wow.
This one feels particularly inflammatory. What's the real story here?
It does require careful unpacking.
Yeah.
Al Jazeera looked into Harris's history on this, and they found that she did support access to gender-affirming surgery for people in prisons and immigration detention centers in the past.
Yeah.
However, it's not something she's campaigned on in 2024.
Right.
And when asked about it recently, she simply said, "I will follow the law."
Okay.
It's important to note that federal law does require prisons to provide necessary medical care.
Right.
And courts have ruled that this includes gender-affirming care. However, access to gender-affirming surgery in prisons is still limited.
Okay.
And there's no evidence that it's being offered in immigration detention.
So while Trump's statement might have a tiny grain of truth based on Harris's previous views, it's misleading in the current context and ignores the complex legal issues surrounding this topic.
It's another example of twisting information to fit a narrative.
Yeah. Let's switch gears and look at what Trump had to say about crime and guns.
Right.
He accused Harris of wanting to confiscate all guns and even supporting a complete ban on handguns. Is there any truth to that?
It's a pretty significant distortion of her current stance.
Yeah.
Back in 2019, she did support a mandatory buyback program, specifically for assault weapons.
Okay.
But that's no longer her position. And just to be clear, that wouldn't have applied to handguns at all.
Right.
Completely different.
Al Jazeera confirmed with her campaign that she now supports banning assault weapons, but not forcing people to sell them back to the government.
Okay.
She's also spoken in favor of red flag laws and other gun safety measures.
So her stance has definitely changed, making Trump's claim outdated and inaccurate.
Yeah.
He also made a very broad statement that crime is through the roof, and even cited a statistic that crime had surged 45% under the Biden-Harris administration.
Wow, that number sounds alarming.
It does.
Did Al Jazeera find that to be accurate?
Not quite. They looked at the FBI's crime data.
Okay.
And it actually shows an overall drop in violent crime between 2020 and 2023. There was a weird statistical blip that made it look like there was a 4.5% increase between 2021 and 2022.
Okay.
But that was because of changes in how the FBI was collecting data that year, making the 2021 numbers unreliable.
So once again, we see a carefully chosen statistic being used to paint a misleading picture.
Exactly.
Really crucial to understand the context and methods behind any crime stats before jumping to conclusions.
Absolutely.
I find it interesting that out of all the controversial things said at this rally,
Yeah.
Fox News chose to highlight J.D. Vance's CNN interview.
Yes. Their piece focuses on how Vance very skillfully steered Jake Tapper's line of questioning away from potentially damaging topics, a move that was applauded by conservatives.
Okay.
It's worth noting that Jake Tapper is a well-known journalist
Yeah.
who often interviews prominent political figures on his show, The Lead, with Jake Tapper.
Right.
And J.D. Vance, a Republican senator, has been a vocal supporter of Trump's policies.
So it seems like they're framing this as a win for Trump's side,
Yeah.
even with all the other controversies swirling around.
It's a strategic choice, for sure,
Yeah.
focusing on a moment that makes them look strong
Yeah.
rather than addressing the factual inaccuracies of other claims.
Well, we've definitely covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
It seems like this rally was carefully crafted to appeal to certain emotions and anxieties, even if it means bending the truth a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you think this means for the upcoming election?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say that immigration, crime, and national security,
Yeah.
they're going to be major talking points during the campaign.
Right.
And we can probably expect Trump to keep playing on the fears and anxieties of his supporters, potentially in ways that become even more inflammatory and divisive.
That's definitely something to keep an eye on.
It is.
But for now, we'll take a quick break
Okay.
and come back to unpack what we can learn from this event. Right.
And what it reveals about the current political landscape.
It's fascinating how this rally, especially with its New York City setting, almost feels like a performance.
Yeah.
A carefully constructed one,
Yeah.
designed to energize Trump's base and push a very specific narrative.
It's almost like he's intentionally poking the bear,
Yeah,
choosing a location that represents everything he seems to oppose.
exactly. And it seems to be working.
Yeah.
Many of the claims we've discussed, particularly those about immigration and crime,
Yeah.
they play into very real fears and anxieties
Right.
that many people have.
And by tapping into those fears, he's able to sidestep rational debate
Yeah,
and connect with his supporters on a deeper emotional level.
absolutely.
Is powerful.
It's very powerful.
Wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. He's speaking a language that resonates with a segment of the population who feel unheard,
Yeah.
left behind, or even threatened by the changing demographics and social norms we're seeing in the country. It's like he's offering a simple explanation for complex problems,
Yeah.
which can be very appealing
It can.
in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain.
Exactly. And that's why we can't just dismiss these claims as outlandish or absurd.
Right.
We need to understand the underlying fears
Hmm.
and anxieties
Yeah.
that make them resonate with certain audiences.
So what are some of those underlying fears? What's the core message that's resonating with his base?
One recurring theme is this idea of outsiders posing a threat to real Americans, whether it's immigrants, criminals, or even people perceived as culturally different.
Yeah.
There's this narrative of us versus them that runs through many of his claims.
That's a powerful and sadly a very common tactic
It is.
throughout history.
Yeah.
It's a way to create division and solidify power.
And it's especially effective during times of uncertainty and change.
Right.
When people are looking for someone to blame for their problem, it's easier to point a finger at an outsider than to grapple with complex systemic issues.
Which brings us back to the rally's location,
Yeah.
holding it in New York City, a place that embodies diversity and cosmopolitanism.
Right.
Feels almost like a symbolic act of defiance.
It's like he's saying, this is what I'm against. And that message is likely to resonate with his base, who may see places like New York City as representing everything they fear
Right.
and resent.
It's also worth noting that this rally occurred just days after a terrorist attack in the U.S.,
Oh, wow.
which Trump mentioned several times during his speech.
That's not a coincidence.
Yeah.
He's using that heightened sense of fear
Right.
and insecurity
Yeah.
to justify his hardline stance on immigration and national security.
It's a classic tactic, exploit a crisis to push your agenda.
And it often works
Yeah.
because people are looking for reassurance
Right.
and strong leadership during those times.
Right. It plays into that idea of needing a strongman figure
Exactly.
to protect us from them. So, taking all of this into account, what do you think this rally tells us about the upcoming election?
That's a good question.
What are the key takeaways we should be paying attention to?
I think it's safe to say that immigration,
Yeah.
crime, and national security
Yeah.
are going to be front and center
Right.
in the campaign.
And we can probably expect Trump to continue appealing to the fears and anxieties of his base.
Unfortunately, that seems likely.
Potentially in ways that become increasingly inflammatory and
Yes.
divisive.
And that means the stakes for this election are incredibly high.
Absolutely. The outcome will have a profound impact on the direction of the country
It will.
and the very fabric of our society.
It's a stark reminder that we can't afford to be complacent.
Yeah.
We need to be informed,
Right.
engaged,
Mm.
and willing to speak out against hate and intolerance.
And we need to hold our leaders accountable
We do.
for their words and actions.
Absolutely.
But focusing on just the negative aspects of this rally doesn't give us the full picture.
You're right. We also need to acknowledge the genuine concerns and anxieties that many people feel.
Yeah.
These feelings are often rooted in real economic hardship, social change, and cultural shifts
Yeah.
that have left many feeling disoriented and disillusioned.
It's not about dismissing those feelings,
Right.
but rather engaging with them in a constructive way,
I agree.
trying to understand the root causes and finding solutions that address the underlying issues.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that there are legitimate anxieties at play and finding ways to address them without resorting to fear-mongering
Right.
and divisive rhetoric.
That requires empathy,
It does.
understanding,
Yeah.
and a willingness to listen to perspectives that might differ from our own.
It's also about promoting critical thinking and media literacy, helping people to distinguish between fact and fiction,
Right.
and to be more discerning consumers of information.
And it's about fostering civil discourse and respectful debate,
Absolutely.
even when we disagree.
These are all crucial components of a healthy democracy.
Absolutely. So while this rally might highlight some concerning trends in our current political landscape, it also presents an opportunity for us to engage in more constructive dialogue
I agree.
and to work towards solutions that address the real concerns facing our nation.
Well said. Ultimately, it's about finding common ground, building bridges, and working together to create a more just and equitable society for everyone.
Beautifully put. So after taking this deep dive into Trump's Madison Square Garden rally, what are some of the key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think it really drives home the power of rhetoric,
Yeah.
especially when it taps into, existing fears and biases. It's a reminder that those in positions of power can easily manipulate information and present a distorted view of reality to achieve their goals.
Yeah, it's almost like we saw a masterclass in crafting a narrative,
Yeah,
even if that narrative isn't grounded in fact.
exactly. And we saw how easily facts can be twisted or omitted or taken out of context to create a more compelling story, one that resonates emotionally, even if it's not entirely accurate.
Yeah, and that's what's so concerning, right? It highlights how important critical thinking and media literacy are
Absolutely.
in today's world. We can't just passively absorb information. We need to be active participants, questioning what we hear, verifying sources, and considering different perspectives.
Absolutely. It's not enough to just be informed. We need to be discerning, analytical, and willing to challenge our own assumptions.
Because if we're not, we risk falling prey to emotional manipulation and misinformation,
Right.
which can have serious consequences for our individual choices and for society as a whole.
It's a reminder that we all have a responsibility to be informed citizens who can engage in, thoughtful debate, hold our leaders accountable, and make informed decisions based on facts, not just feelings.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to remember that our own biases can play a role in how we interpret information. We all come to the table with preconceived notions and beliefs, and those can unconsciously shape how we process new information.
That's a great point. Being aware of our own biases is crucial for navigating this information landscape effectively. It allows us to be more open to different perspectives and to challenge our own assumptions, which can lead to a more nuanced understanding of complex issues.
And that openness to different perspectives is essential for a healthy democracy.
Absolutely.
Right. It's about having respectful dialogue even when we disagree, seeking common ground, and working towards solutions that benefit everyone, not just a select few.
Well said. It's about recognizing our shared humanity and working together to build a more just and equitable society.
I think that's a powerful message to leave our listeners with. This deep dive into Trump's rally wasn't just about fact-checking his claims. It was about understanding the deeper implications of his rhetoric and what it tells us about the challenges facing our society today.
It's about recognizing the power of language, the importance of critical thinking, and the need for informed and engaged citizens who are willing to stand up for truth, justice, and the well-being of all.
Beautifully put. On that note, we'll wrap up this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and stay engaged.